Here is something most people never think about when they think about ancient civilization. Drains. Not pyramids. Not templars. Not kings carved into stone. Drains. The systems that make cities possible. The civilization we are exploring tonight was one of the largest urban civilizations of the Bronze Age. It covered a vast territory, with more than 1,000 settlements, and cities that held tens of thousands of people, and when archaeologists finally uncovered it, buried beneath the soil of what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, the thing that stopped them was not a palace or a throne. It was the drains, carefully planned, precisely built, integrated into entire cities. Someone decided they mattered. We do not know who. We cannot read their writing. We do not know the name of a single person who lived there. Not a king, not a priest, not a child. What we have are the drains, the streets, the standardized bricks, and the silence. Welcome to Forgotten Earth. This is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization. A note before we begin. Some moments in this story use careful reconstruction to help you see what the evidence suggests. Everything else comes from documented work by named researchers. Where the evidence is uncertain, we will say so. Where experts disagree, we will tell you that too. That is the only honest way to tell a story like this. Now, let us go in. Chapter 1. The city that had no name for its king. Close your eyes for a moment and think of what a great ancient civilization looks like. You probably see a pyramid, or a ziggurat, a massive temple rising above the city below it. A wall carved with the image of a king raising his weapon above a defeated enemy. A throne room, a god demanding tribute, power making itself visible in stone and gold, and the bodies of conquered people arranged to tell a story about who was in charge. That is what civilization looked like in the ancient world. Almost everywhere. Now, travel east, to the floodplain of the Indus River and its tributaries, in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Here, beginning around 2600 BCE, something was happening at a scale that would not be matched anywhere in the world for centuries. A civilization covering roughly 1 million square kilometers, larger than Western Europe, containing more than 1,000 settlements. From small villages to cities of tens of thousands of people. Its two largest known cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, each housed populations that researcher Jonathan Mark Kenoyer of the University of Wisconsin estimates at somewhere between 40,000 and 80,000 people at their height. Those estimates carry genuine uncertainty, as all population figures for ancient cities do. But even the most conservative end of that range makes these among the largest urban concentrations on Earth at the time. And yet, when archaeologists began excavating these cities in the 1920s, what they found, or more precisely, what they did not find, stopped them completely. No palace, not a single structure that could be identified with confidence as the residence of a ruler. No royal tomb filled with treasures and the bodies of servants sent to accompany a king into death. No victory inscription recording the names of defeated enemies. No image of a figure raising a weapon over a prostrate captive, in the way that Egyptian and Mesopotamian rulers covered every available surface with proof of their power. The pattern was consistent, striking, and entirely without precedent in the archaeology of any other major Bronze Age civilization. John Marshall, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, who oversaw the first major excavations at both sites, beginning in 1921, had spent years working in the Mediterranean world, where the grammar of ancient power was familiar and legible. Palace, temple, royal inscription. He knew what civilization was supposed to look like. What he found at Mohenjo-daro violated every expectation that grammar had created. What he found instead was something that looked, in certain ways, almost modern in its priorities. The cities were planned, not in the organic, sprawling way that most ancient settlements grow. with streets bending around older structures and neighborhoods accumulating without coordination. These were cities laid out on a grid, with main streets running roughly north to south and east to west, and smaller lanes branching off at regular intervals. The same basic urban grammar repeating across sites, separated by hundreds of kilometers. The buildings were made from standardized mud bricks. Not just similar bricks, standardized. Produced in ratios of roughly 1 to 2 to 4 that held consistent across sites from one end of the civilization to the other. This standardization implies either a centralized production and distribution system, or a shared technical tradition so deeply embedded in Harappan building culture that it reproduced itself reliably without central enforcement. Which of those explanations is correct is something the available evidence has not resolved. The most impressive built features of the major Indus cities are not temples or palaces. They are a public bath and a drainage system. Now, before we go any further, something important must be said about what absence means in archaeology. Researcher Shereen Ratnagar, whose work on Harappan urbanism has been consistently rigorous in questioning comfortable narratives, has argued that the absence of obvious palaces and military structures does not prove the absence of hierarchy or coercive power. Power does not always express itself through the most visible possible means. A society can maintain order through control of essential resources, through social hierarchies enforced by custom and tradition rather than physical force, through the management of trade networks that makes resistance impractical, without requiring anyone to pick up a weapon. The pattern of absence is real. The interpretation of that pattern is genuinely contested. What the evidence does support, with considerable confidence, is this: the Indus Valley Civilization was real. It was large. It was sophisticated. It operated at a scale requiring some form of coordination we have not yet been able to identify from the material record. And it did all of this while leaving behind a signature of power so different from its contemporaries that when Western archaeologists finally found it in the 1920s, they almost did not recognize it as a civilization at all. That recognition, and everything it has taken since to begin understanding what was actually there, is where this story begins. Imagine someone walking that grid-planned street in the early morning. The city around them already moving, already organized, already doing the quiet work of being a city. They do not know they are living in one of the largest urban centers on Earth. They do not know that the bricks beneath their feet were made to the same ratio as bricks being laid in a city 500 kilometers away by people they will never meet. They only know the street, the morning, the particular weight of what they are carrying. That is enough. That has always been enough. We are only now learning how to look for them. Chapter 2. The drain beneath the street. There is a detail about the ancient world that most history education glosses over. Not because it is unimportant, because it is unglamorous. Sanitation, the management of human waste, of clean water, of the physical infrastructure that separates one from the other, is by any serious measure one of the most consequential engineering challenges any urban civilization faces. Get it wrong and your city kills its own people. Get it right, and you create the physical precondition for large populations to survive and function together across generations. Most ancient civilizations got it partially right at best. The Romans built impressive aqueducts and public baths. They also dumped waste directly into the Tiber, in quantities that created serious public health problems in the city's densest neighborhoods. Medieval European cities managed human waste so poorly that epidemic disease was a routine feature of urban life. London did not have a functioning integrated sewer system until the 1860s. After a cholera epidemic killed tens of thousands, and a summer so foul the smell rising from the Thames forced Parliament to suspend its sessions. The 1860s. The drainage system beneath Mohenjo-Daro was built roughly 4,500 years before that. What archaeologists found there was not a primitive arrangement of open ditches. It was an integrated urban drainage network. Individual houses had bathrooms with brick-lined floors sloped to direct wastewater into covered drains running beneath the streets. Those street drains connected to larger collector drains. The collector drains were built with access points at regular intervals so that blockages could be cleared and the system maintained. The bricks lining these drains were fired, not sun-dried. Fired brick is harder, more water-resistant, and more durable. Using fired brick for underground drainage that no one would ever see represents an investment in engineering quality for purely functional reasons, with zero display value whatsoever. Think about that choice. Every other major ancient civilization we know of invested its best materials and its most skilled labor in things people could see. Templars, palaces, monuments. The Indus cities invested comparable engineering sophistication in infrastructure that ran entirely under the ground, invisible to everyone except the workers who maintained it. Now here is the detail that tends to stop researchers mid-sentence when they describe it. When Marshall's team began excavating Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, the local workers helping with the dig assumed at first that the brick structures they were uncovering were recent, not ancient. Not thousands of years old, recent, because the construction quality was so consistent, the mortar so sound, the layout so logical, that the idea of extreme antiquity did not immediately register. They thought they were digging up something built within living memory. They were digging up something built 4,500 years ago. The drains looked new. This infrastructure was not limited to Mohenjo-Daro. Comparable systems have been documented at Harappa and at other major Indus sites. But it is at Dholavira, the remarkable city in what is now the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, that the Harappan relationship with water reaches its most extraordinary expression. Dholavira was identified as a significant site in the 1960s, but not systematically excavated until Ravindra Singh Bisht and the Archaeological Survey of India began serious work there in 1989. What they found was not a smaller version of Mohenjo-Daro. It was a city that had solved a completely different problem. Mohenjo-Daro sits beside the Indus River. Water was abundant. The challenge there was managing too much of it during flood season. Dholavira sits in the Rann of Kutch, a landscape that is largely dry for most of the year. The challenge there was capturing and storing what little water the seasonal rains provided, and making it last. The solution was a system of large reservoirs cut directly into rock along the edges of the city, connected by channels that directed seasonal rainfall from the surrounding hills into storage. Bisht's excavations revealed a total storage capacity that researchers estimate was sufficient to supply the city's population through the long, dry months of the year. To build this system required calculating water needs accurately, designing a collection network that could capture unpredictable seasonal rainfall reliably, and coordinating construction across what must have been a significant organizational effort. This was a city that understood its environment and engineered a response to it. At Dholavira there is also a large open public space that Bisht interpreted as a kind of civic plaza, designed for communal gathering on a substantial scale, and above what may have been a city gateway, there was once an inscription in the Indus script, the largest single Indus inscription ever found, carved in wooden letters that did not survive the millennia. Only the impression of the mounting structure remains. We do not know what it said, but someone thought it important enough to put large public words above the entrance to their city. That is information. Even in the silence of what those letters contained, the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro takes all of this somewhere deeper. It is approximately 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and nearly 3 meters deep, lined with carefully fitted fired bricks, sealed with bitumen, a naturaltar, to make it completely watertight, fed by a well, drained through a large outlet, colonnaded galleries running along its sides. The most widely held interpretation, developed by Marshall and elaborated by subsequent researchers, is that it served ritual bathing functions. perhaps connected to purification practices. Whether this connects to the ritual bathing traditions that have been central to South Asian religious life from the historical period to the present day is a possibility that researchers, including Kenoyer, have explored carefully. While acknowledging that the connection cannot be directly demonstrated from current evidence. But here is what the bath tells us, regardless of its specific function. Someone decided that a large, perfectly sealed, architecturally refined public water structure was worth building at the center of their most important city. Not a throne room, not an armory, not a monument to a ruler, a place for water, a place where the community came together around something that the people who built it considered important enough to seal with bitumen and surround with colonnaded stone. The engineering outlasted the explanation, and in some ways, the fact that the engineering outlasted the explanation is the most Harappan thing about it. This was a civilization that built for function so seriously, so consistently, so carefully, that 4,500 years later, the thing they built still holds its shape. The meaning did not survive. The craft did. Chapter 3. The cities no one has dug. There is a particular kind of frustration that belongs to knowing something is there without being able to reach it. Not the frustration of a mystery with no clues. The sharper kind. The kind that comes from standing at the edge of something enormous and understanding, with clarity, that most of it is still there, intact, waiting, and that the reasons you cannot get to it have nothing to do with the limits of science or imagination. They have to do with a railway. In the 1850s, British colonial-era construction crews needed ballast for the trackbed of the Lahore to Multan railway line. Someone noticed that the ruins of an ancient site nearby contained enormous quantities of very well-made fired bricks. Strange bricks, with an unfamiliar size ratio. Old, clearly, but structurally excellent. Hard, durable, exactly what you need under a railway. Thousands of tons of those bricks went into the foundation of that line. Those bricks were Harappan. They had been fired 4,000 years ago by people who understood fired brick as well as anyone who has ever worked with it. They were, in some cases, the physical remnants of buildings from one of the largest cities of the ancient world. They went under a railway before anyone understood what they were, before anyone knew the civilization they came from had existed. They are under the tracks now. That loss is permanent. No excavation will ever recover what was destroyed to build that line. The knowledge those structures contained about the layout and specific character of that city is gone in the most complete sense of the word. This is what it costs when a civilization disappears so thoroughly from human memory that even the physical evidence of it can be mistaken for rubble. Most people who know anything about the Indus civilization know two cities. Harappa, in what is now Punjab, Pakistan, Mohenjo-Daro, roughly 500 kilometers to the south in Sindh. These are the sites that defined the initial understanding of the Harappan world, and that still dominate the popular imagination of what it looked like. They are also, by current estimates, just the most visible fraction of a civilization containing more than 1,000 individual settlements spread across an area larger than the combined territory of Egypt and Mesopotamia at their respective peaks. 1,000 settlements, of which only a small number have been excavated in any meaningful sense of the word. The reasons are worth understanding, because they are not simply the product of archaeological neglect. A significant number of known Indus sites are not sitting in open desert waiting for a spade. They are buried under living cities whose populations have no interest in being excavated. The modern city of Harappa in Pakistan has grown up directly over and around the ancient site, and construction activity over the past century has destroyed portions of the archaeological record that are now permanently gone. Then there is the political dimension. The partition of British India in 1947 divided the subcontinent in ways that placed the two largest known Indus cities in Pakistan, while placing the majority of subsequent archaeological funding and institutional capacity in India. For decades after partition, Collaboration between Indian and Pakistani archaeologists was severely limited by the political relationship between the two countries. Research programs that might have benefited from coordinated investigation across the full geographic extent of the civilization were instead conducted in parallel, in separate national frameworks, with limited ability to share findings in real time. This is not a criticism of the archaeologists involved. It is a description of how geopolitical reality shapes the production of knowledge about a civilization that predated both modern nations by 4,000 years and belonged, in any meaningful sense, to neither. Dholavira, which the previous chapter introduced, is the example that makes most concrete what we gain each time a major new site is properly investigated. Before Bisht's excavations beginning in 1989, the picture of Indus urbanism was built almost entirely from Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, both located in the Indus River floodplain where water was abundant. Dholavira showed that the Harappan urban tradition was capable of adapting its core principles to radically different environmental conditions while maintaining the same fundamental commitment to planned infrastructure and civic organization. One new site, a completely changed picture. Then there is Rakhigahi in Haryana, India, where ongoing excavation led by Vasant Shinde has been producing results suggesting it may have been among the largest Indus cities, potentially covering an area of 300 hectares or more, which would make it comparable to or larger than Mohenjo-Daro. The excavations conducted so far have exposed only a fraction of the site, and Ganveriwala in Punjab, Pakistan, estimated from surface evidence to have covered approximately 80 hectares, comparable in size to Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Located in the Kholistan Desert, along the former Gagahakra river course, sitting in a politically and logistically challenging region close to a sensitive border area, never properly excavated. It has been there for 4,000 years. We have not dug it. The concentration of large unexcavated sites along the former Gagahakra corridor is one of the most significant features of the current research landscape. Surface survey has documented hundreds of Harappan settlements along this former river. A density of occupation suggesting this valley may have been as important to the civilization as the Indus River itself. Understanding the relationship between these two great axes of the Harappan world requires excavation that has not yet been done. Recent survey work using declassified Corona spy satellite imagery from the 1960s and 70s, analyzed by a team including Francesc Conesa of the University of Cambridge and colleagues in work published in 2021, identified hundreds of previously unrecorded sites across the former Harappan territory in Pakistan. Many are small, but their distribution changes the picture of how the Harappan world was organized at its local scale, and it points toward where future excavation should focus. The civilization was larger than our current picture of it. How much larger is one of the most genuinely open questions in the archaeology of the ancient world. Somewhere under the soil of Pakistan and India, under modern towns and farmland, and 4,000 years of accumulated sediment, there are streets that have not been walked since the Harappan civilization ended. There are drains that have not carried water since a world we are only beginning to understand stopped functioning. The man walking through Mohenjo-Daro at the opening of this story walked one of the streets we have found. Most are still waiting. Most have been waiting longer than any human civilization has existed since. Chapter 4. The script that no one can read. There is a specific kind of silence that is louder than noise. The silence of a language you can see but cannot hear. The silence of marks made by human hands. Deliberately, carefully, with clear intent, on objects that have survived 4,000 years intact, and that still refuse, after more than a century of serious scholarly effort, to give up what they mean. The Indus script is that kind of silence. Since the first excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, archaeologists have recovered approximately 4,000 objects bearing inscribed marks, seals carved from steatite, a soft soapstone that takes fine detail beautifully, tablets of fired clay and copper, pottery with signs incised before firing, small objects of uncertain function covered in sequences of marks that clearly meant something precise and important to the people who made them. Those marks have not been read by anyone alive today. Not with any confidence the scholarly community accepts. Not with any interpretation that has survived rigorous scrutiny. The Indus script remains. After more than a century of serious effort by skilled researchers, undeciphered. To understand why, it helps to understand what makes a script decipherable in the first place. The great decipherments of history all succeeded because of specific conditions that made the problem solvable. Egyptian hieroglyphics were cracked because of the Rosetta Stone, a decree issued in 196 BCE and inscribed in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic Egyptian, and ancient Greek. Because scholars could read Greek, they had a key. A known language provided the bridge into the unknown one. Linear B was solved in 1952 by Michael Ventris, an architect working largely outside the academic establishment, who made a brilliant, intuitive leap, correctly guessing that the underlying language was an early form of Greek, and then tested that hypothesis against the internal structure of the script with enough consistency to confirm it. Every successful decipherment has relied on at least one of 2 conditions: either a bilingual inscription providing a known language as a bridge, or a correct identification of the underlying spoken language combined with enough inscribed material to test the hypothesis systematically. The Indus script has neither. No bilingual inscription has been found. Despite decades of excavation and the recovery of thousands of inscribed objects, not a single text has turned up presenting the same content in Indus script and in any other writing system that can be read. And the underlying spoken language of the Indus civilization is unknown. This second problem is more fundamental than it might initially appear. When you do not know what language a script encodes, you cannot test phonetic interpretations against known vocabulary. The script floats, disconnected from any linguistic anchor that would allow hypotheses to be verified or falsified. Now here is the detail that makes the scale of this problem viscerally clear. The average Indus inscription contains between 4 and 6 signs. 4 to 6 signs. The longest known inscription contains around 17 signs. That is the longest. Most are shorter than a text message. This brevity is a serious obstacle because short texts do not contain enough internal repetition and structural variation to allow the statistical analysis that helped crack longer scripts. With Egyptian hieroglyphics, researchers had entire temple walls covered in text. With Linear B, they had hundreds of clay tablets from administrative archives. With the Indus script, they have thousands of objects, almost all bearing only a handful of signs, with no known linguistic anchor and no bilingual bridge. The total inventory of distinct signs, depending on how you count variants, is estimated by different researchers at somewhere between 400 and 600. That number sits in an awkward middle range, too many for a pure alphabet, which typically uses between 20 and 40 signs. Too few for a full logographic system encoding an entire vocabulary, which would need thousands. This ambiguity has generated significant debate about what the script was actually capable of expressing. Some researchers argue it was a full writing system, capable of encoding the complete grammar and vocabulary of a spoken language. Others propose it may have been a more limited system, encoding only certain categories of information such as names, titles, and commodity types. The debate matters because the 2 positions have different implications for what decipherment would even mean, and what we could ever hope to learn from it. The most sustained, serious decipherment attempt has been pursued for decades by Asko Parpola of the University of Helsinki, who has argued that the underlying language was a Dravidian language related to Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and other languages spoken in southern India today. His approach involves attempting to match sign forms to Dravidian words through a rebus principle, the same technique that works in other ancient scripts. His work is careful and extensive. It has also not achieved the independent confirmation that would constitute a genuine decipherment. In 2009, researcher Rajesh Rao of the University of Washington published work using statistical analysis of sign sequences to argue that the Indus script shows patterns consistent with a linguistic system rather than a purely symbolic one. That work attracted significant attention and also significant methodological criticism. The debate it generated has been productive in clarifying what statistical approaches can and cannot establish about undeciphered scripts. The honest answer at this point is simply this: the script has not been deciphered. The conditions required for decipherment are currently absent, and whether those conditions will ever be met is genuinely unknown. Scripts have been deciphered after longer periods of obscurity than this one. The Rosetta Stone was found 2,000 years after the last person who could read hieroglyphics had died. Ventris solved Linear B 30 years before the computational tools that might have helped him were available. There may be reasons for cautious optimism that the Indus script will eventually yield, but the timeline for that yielding, if it comes at all, belongs to a future no one can currently see. What sits in that silence, if the script encodes a full language, is everything. The names of the people who built Mohenjo-Daro, the words used for whatever rituals were performed in the Great Bath, the terms of the trade agreements that sent Indus objects to Mesopotamia, the knowledge accumulated across 7 centuries of Harappan urban life that might, if we could read it, answer every question this documentary is asking, all of it sitting in 4 to 6 signs per inscription. The man walking through that city in the early morning almost certainly could read the signs he passed on the seal above a merchant's doorway. He knew what they meant. He might have paused at one of them that particular morning, read it, and kept walking. The way you glance at a sign you have read 1,000 times without thinking. We are holding those same signs 4,500 years later, and we cannot hear a single word. The silence is not empty. It is full of everything we have not yet learned to hear. Chapter 5. The merchants at the edge of the world. There is a certain kind of power that does not announce itself with armies. It moves quietly, along rivers and coastlines and overland routes that connect places with different things to offer. It accumulates not in throne rooms but in warehouses, in the hands of people who know where things come from, where they are needed, and how to move them from one place to the other. It is the power of trade, and the Indus Valley Civilization, for all the silence it has left behind about its politics and its religion and the names of anyone whoever mattered within it, has left behind something that speaks with remarkable clarity about this particular kind of power. It left behind its objects in other people's cities. Indus seals, the small carved steatite objects bearing sign sequences and animal images, have been found at archaeological sites in Mesopotamia, at Ur, at Lagash, at other locations in what is now southern Iraq, dating to the period of Harappan fluorescence, roughly 2600 to 2000 BCE. These are not objects that traveled by accident. A carved steatite seal is a deliberate artifact of commerce or identity, used to mark goods or authorize transactions in a world where the seal of a known trading partner carried real communicative weight. Someone carried those seals from the Indus world to Mesopotamia. Someone used them in transactions that left impressions in clay. Someone on the other side of those transactions knew what those seals meant and accepted them as meaningful. That is direct physical evidence of contact between 2 of the 3 great urban civilizations of the Bronze Age world. Not inferred contact. Not contact reconstructed from vague cultural similarities. Physical objects, moved by human hands, from one civilization to another, across several thousand kilometers of land and sea. The Mesopotamian textual record adds a layer of specificity. Cuneiform tablets from the period reference trade with a place called Meluha, described as a distant land reached by sea, a source of luxury goods, including carnelian, lapis lazuli, gold, and exotic woods. The most widely accepted interpretation among specialists is that Meluha refers to the Indus region, though not every researcher treats this identification as settled. What the Mesopotamian texts describe is a wealthy, sophisticated, distant trading partner whose goods were desirable enough to be worth a sea voyage of several thousand kilometers. That sea voyage is itself worth understanding. The maritime route ran along the coast of what is now Pakistan, past the Makran coast, through the Strait of Hormuz, and up the Persian Gulf to the ports of Sumer and Akkad, roughly 3,000 kilometers of coastal and open water, through seas calm for part of the year and genuinely dangerous during the summer monsoon season. The people who made this voyage regularly enough to establish documented trading relationships were professional mariners with detailed knowledge of seasonal wind patterns, coastal hazards, and provisioning points. The Indus civilization was, among other things, a maritime culture. Now here is the detail that makes this trade network feel real in a way that statistics and distances cannot. At the Royal Cemetery of Ur, one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, excavated by Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, archaeologists found buried with the most powerful individuals of one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Among all the gold and lapis lazuli and extraordinary objects of Mesopotamian craftsmanship, carnelian beads, long, barrel-shaped, deep orange carnelian beads, beads of distinctly Harappan manufacture, produced using a specialized firing technique developed in the Indus world and found nowhere else in the ancient Near East. Beads that traveled 4,000 kilometers to end up in the burial chambers of Mesopotamian royalty. The people buried with those beads were among the most powerful human beings alive at the time. They chose to go into death wearing objects made by craft workers on the other side of the known world, in a city whose name they may not have known, using a technique that those craft workers had refined across generations of practical mastery. The quality spoke for itself across that distance. The production of these beads was not a cottage industry. At Chanhudaro and other Indus sites, archaeologists have found specialized bead-making workshops with production waste concentrated in specific areas, indicating organized, large-scale craft manufacturing rather than individual household production. Someone was running a bead industry. Someone was organizing the supply of raw carnelian from the Deccan Plateau. The production process, the quality control, and the distribution of finished products across thousands of kilometers of trade routes. Lapis lazuli tells a different part of the same story. The nearest significant source of lapis lazuli to the Indus world is in the Badakhshan region of what is now northeastern Afghanistan, more than 1,000 kilometers from the Harappan heartland. The presence of lapis objects at Indus sites, and of what appears to have been an Indus presence at the site of Shortagai near the Afghan lapis sources, suggests the Harappan trade network was organized specifically to access this highly valued material. Whether Shortagai represents a permanent Harappan trading presence or something more intermittent is a question researchers continue to debate. The weights are the most quietly extraordinary evidence of all. Across the Indus world, archaeologists have found small, polished stone cubes in a consistent series of sizes, following a binary system that doubles in value from the smallest to the largest. These weights have been found at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers, maintaining the same ratios with remarkable precision. Researcher Shereen Ratnagar has analyzed these systems in detail, noting that the consistency implies either centrally administered standardization or a commercial culture in which honoring standard measures was important enough that communities across a vast area maintained them independently. A merchant in Harappa and a merchant in Mohenjo-Daro, using the same weight system, could trade without dispute about quantities. A Harappan merchant, arriving at a Mesopotamian port with a set of those weights, was equipped to conduct transactions that both parties could verify. Whatever the Harappan cities did not share, they shared their measures. That is the commercial infrastructure of a functioning integrated economy. It does not require a palace to explain. It requires something harder to build and harder to see. It requires trust. It requires a shared understanding, maintained across vast distances and between people who may never have met. That the measure you use is the measure I use, and that when we agree on a quantity, we mean the same thing. The Harappan merchants moved through a network connecting the ancient world from Afghanistan to Arabia. They did it without armies. They did it with craft, with consistency, with the kind of reputation that comes from producing things of genuine quality and honoring the measures that make exchange possible between strangers. The objects are still moving through time, from the soil of ancient cities to the hands of archaeologists, to museum cases in Karachi and London and Washington, still tracing routes that no map of the ancient world has ever fully shown, still telling the story of the people who made them, if you know how to follow where they go. Chapter 6. No walls, no weapons, no war. There is a story that gets told about the Indus Valley Civilization that is deeply appealing. It goes like this. Here was an ancient society of extraordinary sophistication that somehow organized itself without the apparatus of organized violence. No armies. No warrior class carving victories into stone. No images of rulers smiting enemies. A civilization that built drains instead of dungeons. That standardized weights instead of weapons. That left behind no monument to conquest, because perhaps there was no conquest to celebrate. A civilization that found another way. It is appealing because it suggests that the path humanity has mostly walked, toward hierarchies maintained by force, toward states built on the credible threat of violence, toward the long history of conquest running through most of recorded civilization, was not the only path available. That somewhere, once, people built something different. The problem with this story is not that it is impossible. The problem is that the evidence for it is considerably more complicated than the appealing version admits. And the honest engagement with that evidence requires holding the appeal and the complication at the same time. Begin with what the physical record actually shows. No weapons cache comparable to the armories documented at Mesopotamian and Egyptian sites has been found at any major Indus city. The walls surrounding Indus urban centers do not show the specific architectural features that characterize fortifications built primarily for military defense. Towers, at regular intervals. Gates designed to funnel attackers. Protected firing positions. Skeletal analysis of human remains from Indus sites has not produced the rates of traumatic injury consistent with societies where endemic warfare was a significant cause of death. The parry fractures on forearms that appear when someone raises their arm to deflect a blow. The healed blade wounds. The patterns that appear reliably in skeletal populations from societies with documented histories of chronic violent conflict. These are real findings from real research. They are not nothing. But here is where the caution must come in. And it must come in firmly. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Shereen Ratnagar has argued, with considerable force, that the absence of obvious military infrastructure does not mean the absence of coercive power. A society can maintain order through control of essential resources, through social hierarchies enforced by custom rather than force, through the management of trade networks that makes resistance impractical without requiring anyone to pick up a weapon. The granary-like structures at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro controlled access to stored food. Control of food storage is a form of power. The standardized weight system required enforcement of some kind. Because standards that no one enforces are not standards. None of this is the same as saying the Indus civilization was militarized. But it is a long distance from saying it was free of hierarchy or coercion. Now here is the anchor detail that most complicates the peaceful Indus narrative. At Mohenjo-Daro, excavators found a group of skeletal remains in contexts suggesting violent death. Bodies in what appeared to be a street or public space. Signs of traumatic injury. Not buried with the care the Harappan tradition elsewhere suggests was standard practice. Ernest Mackay, who excavated the site in the late 1920s and 1930s, described these remains in terms suggesting massacre, victims of sudden violence at or near the end of the city's occupation. This interpretation was influential for decades. More recent physical anthropological analysis by researcher Kenneth Kennedy of Cornell University substantially revised the picture. The remains dated to different periods rather than representing a single event. Some injuries previously interpreted as violent trauma were more consistent with post-mortem disturbance during excavation or sediment movement. The concentration of bodies that seem to indicate a massacre may reflect the use of that area for disposing of remains over an extended period rather than a single violent episode. This does not mean there was no violence at Mohenjo-Daro. It means the most dramatic evidence for violence was substantially reinterpreted by more careful analysis. The honest picture that emerges is this: the Indus civilization does not look like a society organized around warfare in the way its contemporaries were. The contrast with Mesopotamia, where cities were regularly destroyed and rebuilt, where kings celebrated military victories in detailed inscriptions, where defensive walls were a fundamental feature of urban design, is real and significant. That contrast demands explanation. But the explanation does not have to be that the Indus world was free of conflict or coercion. It may be something more specific and more interesting. Jonathan Mark Kenoyer has proposed a model in which Indus cities were governed by an elite whose power derived from control of trade, craft production, and possibly religious authority, rather than from military force. In this model, the elite maintained their position not by threatening violence, but by controlling access to the goods and networks that made urban life function. It is a form of power. It is also a form of power that is more vulnerable to disruption from environmental and economic stress than military power is, because it depends on the continued functioning of the systems it controls. When those systems eventually came under stress, the power structure that depended on them may have found itself with fewer options than a military state would have had. That observation points toward what happened next, which is a story about rivers, about rain, about the slow withdrawal of the conditions that made everything possible. The man from our opening is still walking his straight street, but the morning we are approaching is later. The city around him is different in ways that are difficult to name but impossible not to feel. The drain beneath his feet still works, just barely. The merchant whose mark he read above the doorway every morning has relocated. The river is lower than it used to be. He does not have a word for what is coming. No one does. Chapter 7. The rivers that stopped flowing. There is a particular kind of ending that does not arrive as a single event. It arrives as a series of small changes that individually seem manageable. A river running lower than usual in a dry season. A monsoon that comes late and delivers less than expected. A well that has to be dug deeper than the one before it. A field that produces a harvest smaller than the one that fed the same number of people the year before. Each of these changes, taken alone, is a problem to solve. Taken together, across a generation, across 2 generations, across 5, they become something else entirely. They become the slow withdrawal of the conditions that made a civilization possible. The ending of the Indus Valley Civilization is one of the most debated questions in the archaeology of the ancient world. And the debate is genuinely unresolved in ways that require honest acknowledgement before any narrative about it can be trusted. There is no single agreed explanation. There is no consensus timeline that every researcher accepts. There is a set of competing hypotheses, each supported by some evidence and contested by other evidence. And the honest position is that the full picture has not yet been assembled. What follows is the most significant evidence and the most credible current interpretations, with the uncertainties named clearly. Begin with the basic shape of what happened. The Indus Valley Civilization reached its urban peak, what archaeologists call the mature Harappan phase, roughly between 2600 and 1900 BCE. During this period, the major cities were at their largest, the trade networks at their most extensive, the material culture showing its greatest standardization across the widest geographic area. After approximately 1900 BCE, the picture changes. The major cities show signs of declining investment in infrastructure maintenance. The drainage systems that had been carefully kept up for centuries begin to show evidence of disrepair. Buildings are subdivided in ways suggesting increasing population pressure or decreasing civic organization. The standardization that had characterized Harappan material culture begins to break down, with regional variations becoming more pronounced. By approximately 1700 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa show dramatically reduced populations. By 1500 BCE, they appear to have been largely or entirely abandoned as major urban centers. This did not happen all at once everywhere. The decline was geographically uneven. While the large cities of the Indus heartland were contracting, settlements in Gujarat and in the eastern regions of the former Harappan territory show evidence of continued occupation and in some cases continued development. The population did not vanish. It shifted. Understanding why requires looking at a river that no longer exists. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system runs through what is now the Thar Desert in northwestern India and Pakistan. Satellite imagery and ground survey have identified hundreds of Harappan sites along its former course. Hundreds. In some stretches, the density of ancient settlement along the banks of the Ghaggar-Hakra is higher than the density of settlement along the Indus River itself. The region that is now desert was once, by the evidence of what people built there, among the most productive and heavily occupied landscapes of the ancient world. It is desert now. Today, the Ghaggar-Hakra is an intermittent seasonal stream for part of its length and completely dry for much of the rest. The contrast between what the density of ancient sites implies about this river and what it is today is one of the most striking features of the entire Harappan story. Something happened to it, something significant, and the debate about exactly what happened is ongoing. Liviu Giosan of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and colleagues, in work published in 2012 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, proposed that the Ghaggar-Hakra was fed during the period of Harappan occupation by Himalayan glacial meltwater, making it a perennially flowing river capable of supporting dense agricultural settlement. As the climate changed and glacier melt decreased, the river gradually lost its year-round flow. Peter Clift, of Louisiana State University and colleagues, have proposed an alternative. In this model, the major Himalayan-fed rivers that once contributed to the Ghaggar-Hakra system were captured by other drainage systems through tectonic processes that redirected their flow entirely. The river did not dry up because of climate change alone. It lost its water sources because the landscape physically reorganized around it. Both hypotheses agree on the outcome. The Ghaggar-Hakra went from a major river to a shadow of its former self. The disagreement is about mechanism and precise timing, and future research will be needed to resolve it. The significance for hundreds of Harappan communities along that corridor is not difficult to imagine. Agriculture dependent on river water would have become impossible. Settlements positioned to exploit the river's resources would have found their fundamental reason for existing removed. Not suddenly. Gradually, over the course of generations that watched the water get lower, and lower, and lower. But river loss alone does not fully explain the pattern of decline. The second major line of evidence involves the monsoon. Paleoclimate records from multiple independent sources, including cave stalagmites from India and Oman, whose oxygen isotope ratios record past rainfall. Lake sediments from the Himalayan region, and marine cores from the Arabian Sea document a weakening of the South Asian monsoon beginning around 2200 BCE and continuing for several centuries. This weakening coincides, in broad terms, with the onset of Harappan urban decline. The coincidence is suggestive, but requires careful handling. Coincidence in timing is not the same as causation. Climate change does not mechanically produce civilizational collapse. Societies respond to environmental stress in diverse ways, depending on their economic organization, their institutional structures, and their geographic position. Researcher Ronojoy Adhikari and others working on the relationship between climate and Harappan decline have emphasized exactly this point. The end of the Indus civilization was not a single event with a single cause. It was a long, geographically variable process, in which environmental stress was a significant factor but operated differently across the vast territory of the Harappan world. There is one more dimension worth attention. Mohenjo-Daro shows clear evidence of having been rebuilt multiple times after flooding events. The city was constructed on platforms raising it above the surrounding plain, and the sequence of rebuilding visible in the stratigraphic record suggests repeated episodes of flood damage followed by reconstruction. For most of the mature Harappan period, the community managed this challenge through elevated platforms and the remarkable drainage infrastructure. But at some point, the combination of flooding, failing agricultural productivity, and declining trade networks made continued investment in the city difficult to justify. People left, not all at once, gradually, the way people always leave places that are slowly becoming impossible to sustain. They went east. They went south. The archaeological record shows an increase in smaller settlements across Rajasthan, Gujarat, and the upper Ganges plain in the period following the decline of the major cities. These post-urban communities carried elements of the Harappan material culture with them. The pottery traditions, the bead-making knowledge, the instincts for organized settlement that had built the grid-planned cities, applied now in smaller and more dispersed and more humble forms. Now, come back to the man from our opening. His grandson's grandson is walking a version of that same straight street. The drain beneath his feet still functions. Just barely. The merchant whose sign he read above the doorway every morning has relocated his operation to a smaller city 200 kilometers to the east. The river that his great-grandfather fished in his childhood is lower than anyone can remember it being. The street is still straight. The city that gave the street its meaning is becoming something else. Not ending. Becoming smaller. More uncertain. More dispersed. The way civilizations end when it is not armies that take them, but the slow and indifferent withdrawal of the rivers that made them possible. Chapter 8. The Aryan Question. There are subjects in the study of the ancient world where the history of the scholarship is almost as complicated as the history it is trying to understand. The question of who the Indo-Aryans were, where they came from, and what role their arrival played in the story of the Indus Valley Civilization is one of those subjects. It has been asked for nearly 2 centuries. It has been answered differently in different eras by different researchers, using different methods, and with very different political stakes attached to the answers. Understanding what the current evidence actually shows requires first understanding why this question became so entangled with forces that have nothing to do with archaeology or genetics, and why that entanglement makes honest engagement with the evidence both more important and more difficult than it would otherwise be. Begin with the observation that started everything. In 1786, the British jurist and scholar William Jones delivered a lecture to the Asiatic Society in Calcutta, observing that Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Indian subcontinent's oldest literary texts, bore systematic resemblances to ancient Greek, Latin, Gothic, Celtic, and Old Persian that were too consistent and too specific to be the product of chance. His conclusion was that these languages must have descended from a common ancestor. a proto-language that no longer existed in any surviving form. Jones was right. The language family he identified, now called Indo-European, is one of the most thoroughly studied topics in historical linguistics. The spread of Indo-Aryan languages, the branch, including Sanskrit and its descendants, into the Indian subcontinent is one of the documented spread events within that family. New shop. The question that generated 2 centuries of controversy is when this spread happened, how it happened, and what it meant for the people already living in the subcontinent when it occurred. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the dominant model was the Aryan invasion theory. A militarily superior people speaking Proto-Indo-Aryan languages swept into the subcontinent from Central Asia or the Iranian plateau, conquering and displacing the existing population. The Indus Valley Civilization, in this model, was destroyed by the incoming Aryans. The Rig Veda, the oldest text of the Indo-Aryan literary tradition, was read as a record of this conquest. This model had serious problems from the beginning. The timing was wrong. The Rig Veda is now generally dated to somewhere in the 2nd millennium BCE, after the major Harappan cities had already been declining for centuries. If the Aryans destroyed the Indus cities, they did so after those cities had already largely emptied. The physical evidence was wrong. A military conquest of the scale required to destroy a civilization spanning 1 million square kilometers would leave evidence of destruction. Burned cities, mass burials of conflict victims, weapons concentrated at sites of battle. None of this has been found at Harappan sites in the pattern an invasion model would predict. By the latter half of the 20th century, the Aryan invasion theory had been largely abandoned by mainstream scholarship in favor of models emphasizing gradual migration and cultural diffusion rather than military conquest. And then the subject became politically explosive. In India, the question of Aryan origins became entangled with questions of national identity and Hindu nationalism. Some scholars and political movements argued that the Indo-Aryans were indigenous to the subcontinent, that there was no migration from outside, that the Vedic civilization and the Indus Valley Civilization were part of the same continuous tradition. This position, sometimes called the out of India theory, proposed that Indo-European languages spread outward from India, rather than arriving in India from elsewhere. The out of India theory has not found acceptance in mainstream linguistics or genetics. The linguistic evidence for the Indo-European family having originated outside India is considered by most specialists to be strong, but the political context in which the debate has been conducted has made honest engagement with the mainstream scholarly consensus genuinely difficult in some research environments. And that difficulty is worth acknowledging openly, rather than pretending it does not exist. This is the landscape into which ancient DNA research arrived. Now here is the anchor detail, the specific finding that makes the genetic evidence concrete rather than abstract. At Rakhigarhi in Haryana, skeletal material from Harappan burials was analyzed for ancient DNA. The results were published in 2019 in the journal Science, by a team including Vagish Narasimhan, David Reich, Vasant Shinde, and colleagues from multiple institutions across multiple countries. The ancient individuals from Rakhigarhi showed a specific genetic profile, a combination of ancestry related to Iranian Neolithic farmers and ancestry related to ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers, with a notable and significant absence: steppe ancestry. The genetic signature associated with the Yamnaya and related cultures of the Pontic-Caspian steppe region north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Present-day South Asian populations carry significant steppe ancestry. The Rakhigarhi individuals, who lived during the height of Harappan urban civilization, did not. The implication is that steppe ancestry arrived in the subcontinent after the Harappan period, not before or during it. The people of the mature Harappan civilization were not the Indo-Aryan speakers of the Vedic tradition. The Indo-Aryan migration, whatever its precise form, appears to have occurred into a landscape that was already post-urban or in the process of becoming so. This is not the Aryan invasion theory of the 19th century. The ancient DNA evidence does not show a sudden replacement of one population by another. It shows a gradual admixture process, in which incoming populations mixed with existing ones over centuries. The genetic signature of the Harappan population did not disappear. It is present as a major ancestral component. In South Asian populations today, the steppe ancestry was added, not substituted. Several important caveats must be stated clearly. The ancient DNA evidence from South Asia is still limited compared with what has been accumulated for Europe. The number of ancient individuals successfully analyzed from the subcontinent is smaller, the geographic coverage less complete, and the temporal resolution less precise than researchers would ideally want. The current picture is a draft, not a finished portrait, and future research will add complexity and possibly require revision of current interpretations. The political sensitivity of this research has also created pressure on researchers that deserves honest acknowledgement. Studies touching on Aryan origins have been received very differently in different political contexts, and the pressure to produce results confirming pre-existing national or religious narratives is real. The most rigorous researchers have navigated this pressure by being extremely precise about what the evidence shows and does not show. That precision deserves to be respected rather than flattened. What the evidence does suggest, held with appropriate caution, is this: the Vedic tradition was not brought to a blank landscape by incoming populations. It developed in a landscape already shaped by the Harappan world, among populations descended in significant part from Harappan communities, absorbing elements of what was already there, even as it incorporated the linguistic and cultural contributions of incoming steppe ancestry groups. The result was something genuinely new, not a replacement of one civilization by another. A long, complex, geographically variable process of encounter and mixture and transformation, playing out across centuries in a subcontinent, large enough and diverse enough to contain all of its participants simultaneously. The people of Mohenjo-Daro and their descendants were part of what that process built. They did not disappear into it. They became part of its foundation. Chapter 9. The Living Inheritance. There is a particular kind of continuity that does not announce itself. It does not come with a declaration, or a monument, or a name carved in stone. It moves through time the way water moves through soil, invisibly, following paths of least resistance, emerging in unexpected places far from where it entered the ground. The inheritance of the Indus Valley Civilization in the world we inhabit today is that kind of continuity. It is not the kind that appears in textbooks with clear dates and labeled arrows. It is embedded in genetics, in the shape of certain practices so old, their origins have become invisible. In the hands of craft workers who have never heard of Mohenjo-Daro, but whose techniques carry something forward from a world that existed before writing could record it. It requires careful looking to see, but it is there. Begin with the genetics, because that is where the evidence is most direct and most precisely measured. The 2019 study, led by Vagehish Narasimhan, David Reich, and colleagues established that the population ancestral to the Harappan civilization contributed a major component of ancestry to present-day South Asians. This ancestral component is present across virtually the entire population of the Indian subcontinent today. From Sri Lanka to Kashmir, from Assam to Gujarat, the proportions vary. Populations in southern India tend to carry higher fractions than populations in the northwest, reflecting different admixture histories in different regions. But the component is present everywhere. What this means, stated plainly, is that an enormous fraction of the human beings alive on Earth today carry in their cells genetic sequences tracing back to the population that laid the drains of Mohenjo-Daro and carved the seals of Harappa. Over 1.5 billion people. They do not know it. There is no ceremony that marks it, no tradition that names it. It is simply there. In the biology. Unannounced. In every cell of over 1 billion bodies going about their lives today. Now, here is the anchor detail that makes the rest of the inheritance feel concrete rather than abstract. In certain workshops in Gujarat today, artisans still produce carnelian beads using heating and shaping techniques, whose basic principles researchers have identified as continuous with, or at minimum deeply similar to, what archaeologists document at Chanhu Daro 4,000 years ago. The specific tools have changed. The markets have changed. The scale has changed. But the fundamental understanding of how to transform a piece of rough carnelian into a polished bead of precise dimensions and specific color has been passed from hand to hand across a chain of transmission spanning 40 centuries. 40 centuries. The man walking through Mohenjo-Daro almost certainly wore or handled objects produced by that tradition. Someone in Gujarat is keeping something of it alive today. Between those two people lies the entirety of recorded history, and something still connects them. Jonathan Mark Kenoyer has argued carefully that certain traditions of bead making, using the specific techniques developed by Harappan craftworkers, appear to have continued in Gujarat and Rajasthan through the post-urban period and into historical times. He is careful about the claim, as careful scholarship requires, noting that continuity of technique does not prove unbroken institutional transmission. But the resemblance is specific enough to be worth taking seriously. The practice of ritual bathing raises a similar question. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is a structure whose probable function was connected to ritual purification. The care taken in its construction points toward a society in which the act of ritual cleansing carried significant meaning. The traditions of ritual bathing in South Asian religious practice are among the oldest and most deeply embedded in the region's cultural life. The practice of ritual immersion in sacred rivers and tanks, the construction of elaborate temple tanks adjacent to places of worship, the centrality of physical purification to religious observance across multiple South Asian traditions. These are documented continuously from the historical period to the present day. Whether these practices have direct institutional continuity with whatever rituals were performed in the Great Bath cannot be demonstrated from current evidence. The honest position is that the gap between the Harappan period and the earliest historical texts describing ritual bathing in detail is several centuries, and direct archaeological evidence of an unbroken chain does not exist. What can be said is that the practice of ritual bathing in specially constructed water structures is attested in the archaeological record of South Asia from the Harappan period onward, and that it occupies a position of central importance in South Asian religious traditions today. Whether that represents genuine historical continuity or independent convergence on a similar solution to similar human needs is a question that honest scholarship must leave open. The linguistic dimension of Harappan inheritance is complicated by the undeciphered script. If the Indus script encodes a Dravidian language, as Asko Parpola and others have argued, then the Dravidian languages spoken today in southern India and in the Brahui language of Balochistan may represent linguistic descendants of the language of the Harappan civilization. The Brahui case is particularly intriguing because it is a Dravidian language spoken in Balochistan, geographically in the heartland of the former Indus world, surrounded on all sides by Indo-Iranian languages. Whether Brahui represents a linguistic remnant of the Harappan population or arrived in the region more recently is a question that has not been resolved. If the script encodes something other than Dravidian, the linguistic inheritance question looks different. The current state of decipherment means this remains genuinely open. What the combination of genetic, archaeological, and craft evidence suggests, when taken together and interpreted with appropriate caution, is that the inheritance of the Indus Valley Civilization in the contemporary world is real, significant, and substantially underappreciated. It is underappreciated precisely because it is invisible in the way that the most durable inheritances often are. Nobody looks at a ritual bathing tank in a South Indian temple and thinks of Mohenjo-Daro. Nobody carrying a carnelian bead made by an artisan in Gujarat thinks of the workshop at Chanhudaro, where that technique was first refined at industrial scale. Nobody whose genetic ancestry is substantially Harappan consciously identifies with that origin, because there is no continuous named tradition connecting them to it. The connection is real nonetheless. The man with the clay vessel, the figure we imagined at the opening of this story, is not only a character from a vanished world. He is, in the most literal biological sense, an ancestor of people alive today. His descendants are writing code in Bangalore and farming the Punjab plains that his civilization once organized into one of the most productive agricultural systems of the ancient world. They do not know his name. They cannot read the signs he read every morning. But the chain between them and him, diminished and transformed and layered over with everything that came after, did not break. That is, in the end, the most extraordinary thing the Indus Valley Civilization left behind. Not the drains, not the seals, not the undeciphered script. The people. Chapter 10. Why we did not know sooner. There is a particular kind of blindness that does not feel like blindness while you are inside it. It feels like normal vision. Everything your methods are designed to see. You see perfectly well. The problem is not with the seeing. The problem is with what your methods were designed to look at in the first place, and what they were never built to find. The Indus Valley Civilization was invisible to the scholarly world for the entirety of recorded Western history. Not unknown in the vague sense of being underappreciated. Invisible in the absolute sense. No ancient Greek writer mentioned it. No Roman geographer described it. No medieval Arab scholar preserved a memory of it. The civilization that had been among the largest urban cultures on Earth during the Bronze Age had vanished so completely from human memory that when the first serious excavations began in the 1920s, the archaeologists involved were not confirming something suspected. They were discovering something whose existence had been entirely unsuspected. That total erasure from historical memory is itself worth understanding. Egypt left records because the dry climate of the Nile Valley preserved papyrus, and because hieroglyphics carved into stone temple walls survived millennia of exposure and were eventually deciphered. Mesopotamia left records because cuneiform pressed into clay tablets is among the most durable recording media the ancient world produced. Thousands of tablets waited in the soil of Iraq and Iran for archaeologists to find them and scholars to read them. The Indus civilization left records too. But those records are in a script no one can read, inscribed on small portable objects rather than architectural surfaces or durable tablets. And the preservation conditions of the Indus region were less favorable to organic materials than the dry conditions of Egypt. The result was a civilization that generated no readable textual record, surviving into any period when someone could have recognized and transmitted it. The chain of memory broke absolutely. The cities emptied. The script fell out of use. The institutional knowledge dissolved. And within a few centuries, there was no living tradition preserving any conscious memory of what the Harappan world had been. Now here is the anchor detail. The one that makes the cost of this erasure most concrete and most painful. Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, encountered evidence of the Indus civilization in the 1870s. Decades before Marshall's excavations, he obtained a seal from Harappa and published it. He interpreted it as a foreign object, something brought to the site from elsewhere, not evidence of an indigenous, ancient civilization. His framework had no place for a sophisticated Bronze Age urban culture in the Indus region. So the evidence that pointed toward one did not register as what it was. The seal sat in the published literature for 50 years. Correctly described. Completely misunderstood. That seal was the key to one of the most significant discoveries in the history of human civilization. It sat in plain sight, published and accessible, for half a century, waiting for a framework that could see what it was. This is what disciplinary blindness looks like. Not stupidity, not dishonesty. A framework that does not contain the category needed to recognize what is in front of you. The category was only created when Marshall's team began systematic excavation at Harappa in 1921. What they found was so unexpected that Marshall waited 4 years before publishing his findings, taking time to satisfy himself that he was not making an error that would embarrass him professionally. His 1924 announcement in the Illustrated London News was carefully worded, precisely because he understood that he was claiming something the existing framework of ancient history had no room for. He was right to be careful. And he was right about what he had found. The partition of India, in 1947, created a research fragmentation that cost decades of potential progress. The major excavated sites ended up in Pakistan. The majority of research funding and institutional capacity ended up in India. The political relationship between the two countries made sustained collaborative research difficult for most of the post-independence period. This is not an abstract observation about geopolitics. It is a specific account of how historical contingency shaped the production of knowledge about a civilization that predated both modern nations by 4,000 years and belonged in any meaningful sense to neither. The technology that has most transformed Indus research in recent decades was not developed for archaeology at all. Satellite remote sensing has expanded the known inventory of sites significantly. The ancient DNA technology that produced the Rakhigahi findings was developed for biomedical research. The isotope analysis techniques used to reconstruct ancient diet and mobility were borrowed from geology and environmental science. Indus archaeology has consistently depended on tools developed for other purposes and adapted to the specific challenges of a civilization that left fewer conventional archaeological traces than its contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The methods are catching up, but the cost of the long delay is real and cannot be wished away. The thousands of tons of Harappan bricks that went into that railway bed in the 1850s are under the tracks now. The portions of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro destroyed by construction activity over the past century are not recoverable. The organic materials that might have survived in protected sediment contexts but were disturbed before anyone understood what they contained have been lost. The blindness costs something real. It always does. What matters now is that the blindness has been substantially corrected. That the tools for seeing the Indus civilization more clearly exist and are being used, and that the researchers working on these questions bring both the ambition to ask them rigorously and the honesty to acknowledge the limits of what current evidence shows. The civilization waited 4,000 years to be found. It waited patiently. In the soil, in the bricks, in the signs on the seals. The questions it is still asking have not yet been answered. But for the first time, the people asking those questions have tools that may be equal to them. Chapter 11. What still lies in the ground. There is a specific kind of anticipation that belongs to knowing something is there without being able to reach it yet. Not the anticipation of a treasure hunter, driven by the fantasy of a single spectacular discovery. The slower, more serious anticipation of a scientist who understands that the questions worth asking about a subject this complex will require decades of patient work, and that the answers, when they come, will be more interesting than any single dramatic find could be. That is the anticipation that honest researchers bring to the question of what the Indus Valley Civilization has not yet given up. The answer, by any reasonable estimate, is most of it. The figure most commonly cited in the specialist literature is that somewhere around 10% of known Indus sites have been excavated in any meaningful sense of the word. The overwhelming majority of the physical record of the Indus Valley Civilization is still in the ground, unexcavated, unanalyzed, waiting in the soil of Pakistan and India and Gujarat, under everything that has been built on top of it since. That is not a failure of archaeology. It is a statement about scale. The Indus world covered 1 million square kilometers and contained more than 1,000 settlements. Excavating even a fraction of that material properly, at the pace and with the care that responsible archaeology requires, is a task that will occupy researchers for generations. Begin with what is already known about what remains. Rakhigarhi, in Haryana, presents the most immediately significant prospect among the known but incompletely excavated major sites. Surface survey and limited excavation suggest it may have covered an area of 300 hectares or more, which would make it comparable to, or larger than Mohenjo-Daro. The excavations conducted so far have exposed only a fraction of the site. Its location in the eastern part of the Harappan world, where the civilization's expansion brought it into contact with the Gangetic cultural sphere, means a full excavation might reveal features neither the Western Heartland sites nor the Eastern post-Harappan sites have yet shown. Ganveriwala in Punjab, Pakistan, estimated to have covered approximately 80 hectares. Located in the Kholistan Desert, along the former Gaga-Hakra river course, never properly excavated. Sitting in a politically and logistically challenging region close to a sensitive border area, it is there. It has been there for 4,000 years. We have not dug it. Recent survey work using declassified Corona spy satellite imagery from the 1960s and 70s, analyzed by a team including Francesc Conesa of the University of Cambridge and colleagues in work published in 2021, identified hundreds of previously unrecorded sites across the former Harappan territory in Pakistan. Many are small, but their distribution across the landscape changes the picture of how the Harappan world was organized at its local scale, and it points toward where future excavation should focus. Now here is the anchor detail that makes the potential significance of what remains most vivid. Wood. The Harappan civilization used wood extensively. For construction, for tools, for boats, for the handles and hafts of implements whose stone and metal components survive, while the organic portions decay away to nothing. The wooden component of Harappan material culture is almost entirely invisible in the current record. Not because wood was not used, but because the preservation conditions at most excavated sites were not favorable to it. In waterlogged and anaerobic contexts, wood can survive for thousands of years. Waterlogged sites in Britain and Denmark have yielded Mesolithic fish weirs, structures made from woven branches and wooden stakes designed to trap fish in tidal channels, preserved in conditions of remarkable completeness. The woven branches retaining their form, the stakes still upright, still functional in appearance, as if the current they were built to intercept might return at any moment. The Indus River system created exactly the kind of waterlogged riverine environments where such preservation is possible. If fish weirs were built in the estuaries and tidal channels of the Harappan world, some of them may survive in the anaerobic sediment of those former channels. No one has systematically looked for them yet. If wooden structures of any kind survive in waterlogged Harappan contexts, the potential significance is difficult to overstate. We would see for the first time not just the durable components of Harappan material culture, but the organic scaffolding that held everything together. The handle tool rather than just the blade, the built structure rather than just the brickwork foundation. The burial record offers a different frontier. The total number of properly excavated Harappan burials is small relative to the size and duration of the civilization. The genetic database for the Harappan population currently rests on a very small number of individuals. A systematic program targeting burial sites across the geographic range of the civilization would transform the resolution of the genetic picture in ways that would answer questions about population structure, mobility, and the relationship between different Harappan communities that current evidence simply cannot address. And then there is the find that every researcher in this field mentions when asked, what single discovery would most change their understanding? A bilingual inscription, an inscription presenting the same text in Indus script, and in any language that can be read would be the key that transforms the entire research landscape. The Mesopotamian textual record mentions Indus merchants. Indus objects have been found at Mesopotamian sites. The commercial contact between the two civilizations was sustained and documented. The possibility that this contact produced a bilingual document somewhere in the archaeological record cannot be excluded. It has not been found. But the excavation is not finished. The Persian Gulf seafloor, along the routes that Indus merchants sailed for centuries, has not been systematically surveyed. The sites along the former coastline of the Arabian Sea that were above sea level during the Harappan period and are now submerged have barely been examined. The possibility is real. If such an inscription is found, every question that the silence of the script currently prevents from being asked will suddenly become askable. The name of the man from our opening might not become recoverable in its specific form, but the word his language used for a person of his kind, in a city of his kind, doing the work he was doing on that straight street in the early morning. That word might finally have a sound. 4,000 years of silence, given a voice by a single piece of inscribed stone. The ground is patient. It has been keeping these things for 4,000 years without complaint, without urgency, without any awareness that we are looking. But the researchers who are looking cannot afford the same patience. Mohenjo-Daro faces rising groundwater, driven partly by changes in regional irrigation patterns, dissolving the salts that crystallize in and crack the ancient brickwork from the inside. The encroachment of modern settlement on the margins of unexcavated sites continues. The political and funding constraints that have slowed research for decades have not been fully resolved. The window is open. It is not indefinitely open. What is there is extraordinary. The 10% that has been excavated has already revealed a civilization of remarkable sophistication, whose implications for the history of human urban life have not yet been fully absorbed into the broader understanding of the ancient world. The 90% that remains is waiting. In the cold dark of the soil, in the waterlogged sediment of former river channels, in the burial grounds we have not yet found. The Indus Valley Civilization is still keeping most of its secrets. It has been keeping them since before Rome was founded, since before the Trojan War, since before the earliest Greek poets composed the verses that became the foundation of Western literary tradition. Patient, silent, still there. Chapter 12. The Mirror and the Rising Water. There is a specific discomfort that comes from studying a civilization that ended and recognizing, with a clarity that grows sharper the more you understand the details, that the forces that ended it are not entirely foreign to the world you are living in now. Not the comfortable discomfort of an interesting historical parallel, the kind you note and set aside because the differences are large enough to keep the comparison from feeling personal. The sharper kind. The kind that arrives when the distance between then and now collapses. The Indus Valley Civilization was built in a specific ecological window. That window was defined by the strength and reliability of the South Asian monsoon, by the flow of the rivers the monsoon fed, by the stability of the climate system that made the agricultural surpluses of the Harappan floodplains possible across 7 centuries of urban life. The people who built Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa did not choose that window consciously. They built their civilization in the best available conditions, as all human communities do, and those conditions supported everything they created. When the conditions changed, the civilization changed with them, not immediately, not in a single season or a single generation. The decline of the major cities was a process unfolding across centuries, driven by the slow withdrawal of the ecological conditions that had made those cities possible. The monsoon weakened, the rivers shifted, the agricultural surpluses that had fed urban populations of tens of thousands became harder to sustain. The people made rational decisions at every step. They moved toward better conditions. They adapted to reduced circumstances. They carried what they could into smaller and more dispersed communities. They did everything right, in the sense of responding reasonably to the conditions they faced. And the civilization still ended, because the conditions changed faster than the civilization's organizational capacity could fully accommodate. That sequence deserves careful attention from anyone living in the present century. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its most recent assessment reports, has documented with high scientific confidence that the South Asian monsoon is being affected by ongoing climate change, driven by greenhouse gas accumulation in the atmosphere. The relationship between global warming and monsoon behavior is complex and not fully resolved by current research. But the scientific consensus is that the monsoon system is changing. Increased intensity of extreme rainfall events, increased variability in the timing and distribution of seasonal precipitation, greater uncertainty in the conditions that hundreds of millions of people depend on for their food and water. For the populations of South Asia, many of whom live in regions that were also part of the Harappan world 4,000 years ago, changes in monsoon reliability have implications that are not abstract. They are written in the productivity of agricultural land, in the levels of rivers supplying drinking water and irrigation, in the frequency of floods and droughts that can devastate seasonal harvests. Here is the anchor detail that makes the parallel most concrete and most difficult to look away from. The 2022 floods in Pakistan inundated roughly 1/3 of the country's territory and affected over 30 million people. Climate scientist Friederike Otto of Imperial College London and colleagues described the floods as having been made significantly more severe by climate change. The scale of destruction was the intersection of a natural weather event with a climate system that human activity has altered in ways that amplify extremes. The Indus Valley, the same geographic region where one of the greatest urban civilizations of the ancient world flourished and then declined in response to environmental change, now experiencing some of the most severe climate-related disruption on the planet. That is an observation about geography, not a claim about direct causal connection across 4,000 years of history. The mechanisms are different. The timescales are different. The degree of human agency involved is entirely different. But the geography is the same, and the fundamental dynamic. A complex urban civilization whose functioning depends on the reliability of water systems that are becoming less reliable is recognizable across the distance. The parallel extends beyond hydrology. The Harappan civilization achieved its remarkable geographic reach through trade networks, shared material culture, and standardized infrastructure, allowing communities separated by hundreds of kilometers to function as parts of an integrated economic system. The vulnerability that came with that integration was the vulnerability of all integrated systems to the failure of their connecting infrastructure. When environmental stress became severe enough that the trade networks began to contract, the communities sustained by those networks found themselves suddenly less resilient than they had been. The contemporary global economy is an integrated system of incomparably greater complexity and geographic reach. The supply chains connecting billions of people in relationships of mutual dependence are not visible to most of the people inside them until they fail. When they fail, the effects ripple through the system in ways that people at the receiving end experience not as the failure of a distant abstraction, but as the absence of things they need. The Harappan merchants who found their trade routes to Mesopotamia contracting did not experience that contraction as a macroeconomic trend. They experienced it as fewer ships arriving, less income, harder decisions about what to maintain and what to let go. The structure of that experience is not unfamiliar. There is a question that the Indus Valley story raises about social organization that has direct relevance to the challenges of the present century. The Harappan civilization managed, for 7 centuries, to organize 1 million square kilometers of territory and maintain sophisticated shared infrastructure without the visible apparatus of coercive central power that characterized every other major Bronze Age civilization. How it did this is not fully understood. Whether it was genuinely more equitable than its contemporaries or simply expressed its hierarchies through different means is debated. But the existence of a civilization that achieved large-scale coordination over an extended period without making warfare and monumental power display its central organizing principle is, in itself, an existence proof. It demonstrates that this is possible. How it was accomplished, if we can ever get close enough to that question to answer it, might tell us something genuinely useful about the possibilities for large-scale human cooperation that the contemporary world urgently needs. That is not a claim that ancient archaeology provides direct policy prescriptions. It is a claim that the questions the Indus Valley Civilization makes us ask are among the most important questions we can currently be asking. The undeciphered script sits at the center of everything. If it were deciphered, we might learn how the Harappan world understood its own organization, what words they used for the institutions that maintained the shared infrastructure, whether they had frameworks for interpreting the environmental changes affecting their world in its later centuries, what they thought was happening, what they thought might be done. All of that is locked in 4 to 6 signs per inscription. The script may one day yield. Scripts have been deciphered after longer periods of obscurity. There may be reasons for cautious optimism that human ingenuity applied persistently to this specific problem will eventually find a way through. But the timeline belongs to a future no one can currently see. And the honesty the subject demands requires acknowledging that openly. Until then, we work with what we have. We read the drains and the weights and the seals and the distribution of beads across a trade network spanning the Bronze Age world. We read the ancient DNA connecting the Harappan people to over 1.5 billion living descendants. We read the pollen cores and the river channel maps and the monsoon proxy records, telling the story of the environmental changes that ended the urban phase of the civilization. And we recognize, in the geography, and in the dynamics, and in the specific human experience of watching the reliable become unreliable, that the story of the Indus Valley Civilization is not finished, in the way that stories about the distant past are usually considered finished. It is still unfolding, in the ground that holds its physical remains, in the DNA of its living descendants, in the climate system that is changing around the same rivers that once fed its greatest cities, in the questions that researchers are only now learning to ask, with tools that are only now becoming powerful enough to pursue answers. The man with the clay vessel walked a straight street, in a city that no one living today has ever seen. His descendants are here. The water that made his city possible is being affected by forces that his civilization could not have imagined, and that ours has created. The question of what we do about that is ours to answer. He answered his questions as well as anyone could, given what he knew and what he had. Whether the chain holds through what is coming depends on what we decide to do with the knowledge he never had. Come back to the street one last time. It is early morning. The air still cool, before the heat of the day settles over the floodplain. The city beginning to move. Quietly. The way cities move in the hour when the night hands over to the day. Each person already in motion toward the thing they know how to do. The man with the clay vessel does not know he is living in one of the largest urban centers on Earth. He does not know that the bricks beneath his feet were made to the same ratio as bricks being laid 500 kilometers away by people he will never meet. He does not know that the weights in the market he is walking toward are calibrated to the same standard as weights being used by merchants in cities whose names he has never heard. Across a trade network that stretches from Afghanistan to the Persian Gulf. He does not know that the drain beneath his feet will still be sealed. Its bitumen still sound. 4,500 years from now, when people who have never heard of his city will pull up pieces of his civilization in fishing nets and wonder what they are looking at. He only knows the street, the vessel, the particular weight of what he is carrying. We have followed the evidence of his world across 12 chapters, through the grid-planned streets and the fired brick drains and the great bath, whose purpose we can almost but not quite reconstruct, through the seals whose signs we can see but not read, pressed into clay that traveled to the cities of Mesopotamia and back again across sea routes that required generations of navigational knowledge to maintain, through the standardized weights that made commerce possible across a civilization larger than Western Europe, through the carnelian bead workshops whose products ended up in the burial chambers of Mesopotamian royalty, 4,000 kilometers from where they were made, through the script that will not speak, through the monsoon that weakened and the rivers that shifted, and the slow withdrawal of the conditions that made the cities possible, through the people who left, carrying what they could, into a smaller and more dispersed world. Through the DNA that connects the Harappan population to over 1.5 billion living people today, through the century of archaeology that brought us from complete ignorance of this civilization's existence to the partial and still deeply incomplete understanding we currently have, the sediment took the cities and kept the bricks. It took the wooden structures, and in certain waterlogged places, sealed them in cold anaerobic darkness, where they may still be waiting. It took the language and kept the signs. It took the names and kept the bones. It took everything that needed air and light and the continued presence of living people to survive. And it kept what it could, seal away and preserve. What it kept is extraordinary. What it destroyed is beyond recovery. Both things are true. Both things matter. The honest relationship with this story requires holding them at the same time without letting the wonder of one erase the weight of the other. What did not survive, in its specific and irreplaceable form, is the knowledge that lived in the communities of the Harappan world. The word for the river the man was walking beside, the name of his city, the meaning of the signs on the seal he passed every morning, the content of the texts that may have existed on materials that did not survive, the nature of the rituals performed in the Great Bath, the reasoning of whoever organized the construction of the drainage system that has outlasted every explanation of who built it and why. That knowledge is gone. The landscape that made it meaningful is under meters of sediment. The people who held it have been dead for 4,000 years. And yet, something persists. In the genetic record of over 1.5 billion people living in the countries that were once the Harappan world and its neighbors, in the craft, traditions carrying Harappan techniques forward through post-urban centuries into hands working today, in the spatial instincts of South Asian urban life that may, in ways we cannot yet fully trace, carry echoes of cities that were doing it first. In religious traditions whose oldest roots reach back far enough that the Harappan world may be among their sources, even if the chain of transmission cannot be directly documented. The chain from the man with the clay vessel to the world we inhabit now passes through 4,000 years of demographic change, cultural transformation, migration, mixture, conquest, and reconstruction. It is not clean or direct or easy to trace. It is attenuated almost beyond recognition. But it did not break. That is not comfort. That is not inspiration. That is a documented fact about what human communities are capable of under conditions of sustained and serious loss. The cities emptied. The trade networks contracted. The script fell out of use. The institutional knowledge dissolved. And still the people carried forward enough of what mattered to allow recovery to begin when the conditions for recovery eventually returned. The drains are still there, under the excavated ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, sealed with bitumen that has not failed in 4,000 years, doing the structural work they were built to do, even though the water stopped flowing through them. Before the first pharaoh of the new kingdom drew breath, the seals are in museum cases in Karachi and New Delhi and London and Washington, carrying signs that meant something precise and important to the people who made them, still refusing, after a century of effort, to give up what they mean, still waiting for the key that has not yet been found. The ancient DNA of the Harappan people is distributed across the genomes of over 1.5 billion living human beings, invisible to them, unannounced, present in every cell. The man with the clay vessel is still walking his straight street, 4,000 years ago and 4 meters underground, in a city we do not know the name of, toward a purpose encoded in a script we cannot read, and somewhere in Gujarat, in a workshop where hands still shape carnelian the way hands have shaped it for 40 centuries. Something of him persists, not his name, not his words, but the knowledge that passed from hand to hand through everything that tried to stop it. The craft outlasted the civilization that invented it. The people outlasted the cities that defined them. The knowledge outlasted the language that carried it. And the questions that his world left behind are still being asked today. by researchers in laboratories and on excavation sites, and in archives of satellite imagery and ancient DNA, working with tools he could not have imagined toward answers that may one day give his silence a sound. Rest well, the Indus Valley is still out there. Under the soil of Pakistan and India and Gujarat. Under the modern cities and the farmland and the desert. Under the accumulated weight of 4,000 years of everything that came after. The straight streets are still straight. The drains are still sealed. The signs are still waiting to be read. And the man with the clay vessel is still walking, still carrying what he knows toward the place where it is needed. The way it has always been done. The way, if we are careful and honest and persistent enough, it may always be done.